Why does healing feel so hard? If healing is supposed to be good for us, why does it feel like falling apart before it feels like coming together? Why does facing your pain feel more terrifying than staying in it? Why does growth sometimes feel like grief? Many people believe healing should feel empowering, uplifting, even peaceful. But the truth is, real healing often feels destabilizing. It can feel like losing yourself before you find yourself. It can feel like confusion, anger, exhaustion, even loneliness. And there is a reason for that. Healing feels hard not because you are weak. It feels hard because your survival patterns were once necessary. Healing feels difficult because it asks you to dismantle the very strategies that once protected you. When you were young, perhaps without realizing it, you adapted. You learned how to stay safe in the emotional climate around you. Maybe you became hyper-independent. Maybe you became the peacemaker. Maybe you shut down your feelings. Maybe you became overly responsible for others' emotions. These were not flaws. They were brilliant adaptations. The nervous system does not care about happiness, it cares about survival. If love was inconsistent, you learned to be vigilant. If affection was conditional, you learned to perform. If emotions were dismissed, you learned to silence yourself. And here is the painful paradox. The very patterns that once kept you safe are the same patterns that now keep you stuck. Healing requires you to feel what you once avoided. It requires you to set boundaries where you once complied. It requires you to say no when your body is used to saying yes, to stay connected. Of course, that feels terrifying because to your nervous system, change feels like danger, even when it is healthy. Healing also feels hard because it confronts grief, not just grief for what happened, but grief for what did not happen, the love you needed but did not receive, the protection you deserved but did not have, the version of yourself you had to abandon in order to belong. And grief is not a neat emotion. It moves in waves. It disrupts identity. It makes you question who you are without your coping mechanisms. There is another reason healing feels hard. When you stop blaming yourself, you may have to acknowledge what hurt you, and that can feel disloyal. Many people protect their caregivers or partners by minimizing their own pain. Admitting harm can feel like betrayal, even when it is simply honesty. Healing asks for truth, and truth can shake the foundation of your entire story. But here is what makes healing possible. Your symptoms are not signs of brokenness. They are signs of adaptation. Anxiety, people-pleasing, emotional shutdown, perfectionism, these are not character flaws. They are survival responses. When you understand that, shame begins to soften. Healing does not mean becoming someone new. It means becoming someone more authentic. It means slowly teaching your nervous system that safety is no longer earned through self-abandonment. It means allowing yourself to feel without collapsing. It means tolerating discomfort without escaping it. And that is difficult work, because healing is not about fixing yourself. It is about remembering who you were before you had to protect yourself. And remembering takes courage. Survival patterns resist change. Survival patterns resist change because your system isn't asking, is this healthy? It's asking, will this keep me connected? Will this keep me safe? Will this prevent rejection, conflict, abandonment, humiliation? And for a long time, the answer was yes. So when you try to heal, what you often meet first is not relief, it's resistance. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't want freedom badly enough, but because the part of you that learned to survive is doing its job. It is loyal, it is vigilant, it is protective. It is trying to prevent the kind of pain that once felt unbearable. Think about what we call coping mechanisms. People-pleasing, overthinking, hyper-independence, emotional numbness, perfectionism, control, rage, withdrawal, business, addiction, caretaking everyone else, staying in relationships that hurt, avoiding conflict at all costs, shutting down needs. We label these as problems. But the deeper truth is they are strategies, they are adaptations, they are evidence that you found a way to survive a world that did not feel safe to be fully yourself in. If, as a child, expressing anger led to punishment, your body learned, don't feel anger. If crying brought ridicule or neglect, your body learned, don't need comfort. If being quiet kept the peace, your nervous system learned, silence equals safety. If being useful earned affection, your system learned, earn love by over-giving. So when you're an adult and you say, I want to stop people pleasing, your nervous system doesn't hear self-growth, It hears danger because people pleasing wasn't just a habit, it was a protection plan. Letting go of a survival pattern feels unsafe at first because it removes the illusion of control. You are stepping out of the role that once kept you included. You are leaving the familiar, even if the familiar was painful. That's why healing can feel like you're getting worse before you get better. You set a boundary, and suddenly you feel guilt, panic, nausea, trembling. Not because the boundary is wrong, but because your body is bracing for what used to come next: anger, abandonment, punishment, withdrawal of love. You stop over-explaining. Your mind screams, they'll misunderstand you, they'll leave. You stop fixing everyone, and you feel strangely empty because your identity was built around being needed. You stop numbing out, and you feel everything, and it feels like drowning. You stop chasing emotionally unavailable people, and you feel the ache of loneliness you were outrunning. Healing is often not adding something, it's subtracting something that was holding your world together. And that subtraction creates a gap between the old strategy and the new way of being. And that gap feels terrifying because in that gap, you don't yet have trust in yourself. You don't yet have proof that you can survive discomfort. You don't yet have the inner experience of, I can be rejected and still be okay. You don't yet have the felt sense of safety inside your own body. So your system says, go back. Do the old thing, it worked before. This is why willpower isn't enough, because survival patterns are not logical choices. They are nervous system reflexes. They live in the body, and the body does not respond to lectures. It responds to felt experience, to repetition, to gentleness, to safety. That's why the real work of healing is not forcing yourself to change. It's slowly teaching your system that you no longer need to earn love through self-erasure. It looks like this. You set a small boundary and you stay with the discomfort without rescuing others from it. You tolerate someone being disappointed in you and you don't collapse. You notice the urge to over-explain and you breathe instead. You feel the panic rise and you remind yourself, this is old fear, not current danger. You choose a healthier relationship and you let it feel unfamiliar without calling it boring. Healing is the gradual retraining of your nervous system to understand that safety can exist without performance, without control, without self-abandonment. And yes, at first, letting go of survival patterns feels unsafe because your body thinks those patterns are love. Those patterns are belonging. Those patterns are protection. But the goal isn't to shame the part of you that clings to them. The goal is to thank it, to say, I understand why you did this. You kept me going. You got me through. And now we can learn something new. Because the measure of healing isn't that you never get triggered again. It's that you can feel the trigger and still choose yourself. It's that you stop confusing attachment with love. You stop confusing familiarity with safety. You stop confusing self-sacrifice with worth. And slowly, quietly, your body learns the most revolutionary truth. You can be safe without disappearing. The nervous system confuses familiarity with safety. Your nervous system confuses familiarity with safety because it was never designed to pursue your happiness. It was designed to keep you alive. And what keeps you alive, especially early in life, is not what's healthy. It's what's predictable. That's the part most people miss. We imagine that if something hurts us, we should naturally move away from it. But the nervous system doesn't always move away from pain, not if the pain is familiar. Not if the pain came packaged with connection, and not if that pain was the emotional climate you learned to adapt to. So even when a relationship is draining, unpredictable, cold, critical, or emotionally unsafe, it can still feel strangely right. Not because you like it, not because you want it, but because your system recognizes it. And recognition feels like safety to a nervous system that learned to survive through pattern matching. If you grew up in an environment where love came with anxiety, you may now associate anxiety with love. If you grew up walking on eggshells, calmness may feel suspicious. If you grew up being emotionally neglected, someone who truly sees, you may feel too much. Invasive, overwhelming, even unsafe. If you grew up having to earn affection, being loved for free can feel undeserved and therefore unstable. This is the cruel paradox of trauma. Your nervous system might reject the healthy and cling to the harmful because the harmful is familiar. That's why people often say, I don't know why I keep choosing the same kind of partner. Or, why do I feel bored in a stable relationship? Or, why do I feel more alive with someone inconsistent? Because alive isn't always love. Sometimes alive is your nervous system in activation, hypervigilance, anticipation, fear, craving, longing, adrenaline. It's the familiar chemistry of unpredictability. Inconsistency creates obsession. Uncertainty creates fixation. Not because you're weak, but because your body is trying to solve an old problem. How do I finally earn the love I didn't get? So you choose what's familiar, hoping this time it will end differently. That's not romance. That's repair, seeking. And healing disrupts what feels familiar because healing introduces something your system may not have had early on. Safety without chaos, love without performance, connection without self-abandonment. And at first, that feels wrong. When you step into a healthier dynamic, your body may react with discomfort, not relief, discomfort. You might feel rest with someone consistent. You might feel irritated by calmness. You might feel numb with stability. You might feel the urge to create a problem, not because you enjoy drama, but because your system is searching for a familiar emotional temperature. Because without chaos, your nervous system doesn't know where it stands. It's like someone who has lived near a highway their whole life. The noise is exhausting, but it becomes the background. Then they move to a quiet neighborhood and they can't sleep. The silence feels unsettling. That's what healing can feel like. You leave the emotional highway, the criticism, the unpredictability, the emotional chasing, and you enter quiet, and your system says, "Where's the danger? What am I missing?" That's why many people go back, not because they're stupid, because their nervous system is trying to return to what it understands. Familiarity can masquerade as chemistry, so you interpret intensity as connection, you interpret anxiety as attraction, you interpret having to prove yourself as, "This must be real." You interpret being emotionally starved as, "I want them so much." But what you want is not always what's good for you, especially if your wanting was shaped by deprivation. Healing disrupts familiarity by forcing you to sit inside new experiences long enough for your nervous system to update. It asks you to tolerate the awkwardness of healthy love, and healthy love can feel awkward at first, because it doesn't hook you with unpredictability. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't reward you one day and punish you the next. It doesn't make your worth feel conditional, so it can feel boring. But often boring is just unfamiliar peace. Here's what's really happening in healing. You are retraining your body to recognize a new kind of safety, not the safety of control, not the safety of appeasement, not the safety of staying small, but the safety of being yourself and still being held. That's a new language for your system, and new languages feel clumsy at first. That's why healing can feel like grief and withdrawal at the same time, because you're not just leaving people or patterns. You're leaving an identity. You're leaving the role that made you feel secure, even when it cost you your authenticity. The strong one, the easy one, the low maintenance one, the one who doesn't need much, the one who forgives quickly, the one who keeps the peace. When you step out of those roles, it can feel like you don't know who you are, and your nervous system panics, because identity, even painful identity, feels safer than the unknown. So how do you work with this? You stop asking, "Why do I keep going back to what hurts?" And you start asking, "What does my nervous system recognize as love? What did I have to do to belong? What patterns feel like home, even if home wasn't safe? What does calmness bring up in me? What happens in my body when someone is consistent?" Because your body will tell you the truth faster than your mind. A healthier dynamic might feel like exhaling and then immediately feeling exposed. Because when you're no longer bracing, you can finally feel what was underneath. That's not a sign you're making the wrong choice. That's a sign you're finally in a space where your system can begin to thaw. So yes, the nervous system confuses familiarity with safety. And that's why healing is not just a decision, it is a practice. A slow, repetitive experience of choosing what is nourishing over what is familiar until nourishing becomes familiar too. Until your body learns. Peace is not emptiness. Calm is not danger. Consistency is not boredom. And love does not have to hurt to be real. Grief is part of healing, and grief is part of healing because healing is not only about letting go of pain. It is about acknowledging what you never received. When people begin healing, they often expect relief, they expect empowerment, clarity, maybe even lightness, and sometimes that comes. But before that lightness, there is often a deep and unexpected sadness, because when you stop surviving long enough to feel, you begin to see the truth. You begin to see what was missing, the comfort you needed but didn't get, the protection that should have been there, the validation that never came, the apology that never arrived, the safety that should have been your baseline. And when you truly allow yourself to see that, not intellectually, but emotionally, grief rises, not dramatic grief, not always loud, sometimes it is quiet, heavy, a slow ache in the chest, a sudden wave of tears that seem to come from nowhere, a feeling of tenderness toward your younger self that feels almost unbearable, because you are not only grieving events, you are grieving unmet needs. You are grieving the childhood you adapted to instead of fully live. You are grieving the softness you had to harden. You are grieving the parts of you that went silent in order to belong. Many people think healing means moving on. But real healing often begins with finally allowing yourself to mourn. You mourn the child who learned too early to be strong. You mourn the teenager who believed they were too much or not enough. You mourn the adult who kept choosing dynamics that felt familiar but painful. You mourn the years spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. And this grief can feel destabilizing because for a long time, survival required minimizing what hurt. Maybe you told yourself, it wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. They did their best. I'm overreacting. I should just be grateful. Those thoughts weren't weakness. They were protection. If you fully felt the pain back then, it might have overwhelmed you. But healing asks you to remove that emotional anesthesia. And when the numbness fades and grief comes forward, grief for what happened and grief for what didn't happen, that second kind of grief is often the deepest. The absence of consistent love, the absence of emotional safety, the absence of someone who said, you don't have to earn this. You are already enough. When you begin to heal, you may realize that certain behaviors you normalize were actually forms of neglect, rejection, or emotional absence. And that realization can feel like betrayal, not only of others, but of your own narrative. Because if you acknowledge what was missing, you can no longer pretend it didn't matter. And it did matter. That is what grief is protecting. Grief also emerges because healing requires identity change. You are not only releasing pain, you are releasing roles. The caretaker, the overachiever, the invisible one, the peacekeeper, the emotionally independent one, the one who doesn't need much. Those roles once gave you belonging. They gave you purpose. They gave you a way to feel valued. Letting them go can feel like losing yourself. There is a sadness in realizing, I built my identity around surviving. When you stop performing, pleasing, fixing, shrinking, you may not immediately know who you are without those strategies. And that uncertainty can feel like loss. Grief is also the body processing what it once had to suppress. Sometimes grief shows up as fatigue, sometimes as irritability, sometimes as withdrawal, sometimes as unexpected tears during quiet moments, sometimes as anger that was never allowed to surface. Anger, especially, is often grief in motion, because anger says something mattered. Grief says something was missing, and healing says it is safe to feel this now. The mistake many people make is trying to rush this stage. They want to skip the morning and go straight to empowerment. But unprocessed grief does not disappear. It embeds itself in the nervous system. It shows up in attraction patterns and self-doubt, in overworking, in anxiety, in emotional numbness. Grief is not a detour in healing. It is the doorway. When you allow yourself to grieve unmet needs, something profound happens. You stop blaming yourself for having them. You stop saying, why am I so sensitive? You start saying, of course I needed that. You stop saying, I should be over this. You start saying, that mattered. You stop saying, I'm too much. You start saying, I was not given enough. And in that shift, shame begins to soften. Grief also reconnects you to compassion. When you imagine your younger self, the one who adapted, the one who tried so hard, grief arises not as weakness, but as love. You are not collapsing. You are witnessing. You are finally turning toward the parts of you that were alone. And here is the deeper truth. Grief is evidence that you value yourself now. You could not mourn what was missing if you still believed you didn't deserve it. Grief means your standards have changed. Grief means you now recognize what healthy love should have looked like. Grief means you are no longer minimizing your own experience. Yes, healing includes strength, but it also includes tenderness. It includes sitting with sadness without rushing to fix it. It includes allowing tears without labeling them weakness. It includes honoring what you lost without turning it into self-criticism. And eventually, grief transforms, not into forgetting, not into denial, but into integration. You no longer feel defined by what you didn't receive. You begin to give yourself what was missing. You begin to build relationships that reflect your worth. You begin to speak to yourself with the gentleness you once needed from others. But you can only build that new foundation after you acknowledge the cracks in the old one. So if healing feels heavy, if it feels like waves of sadness rising unexpectedly, if it feels like mourning something you can't fully name, that does not mean you are going backward. It means you are finally feeling forward. You are not just releasing pain, you are grieving unmet needs. You are grieving lost time. You are grieving old identities. You are grieving the version of yourself that had to shrink. And in that grief, you are making space. Space for a self that no longer survives through denial. Space for a life that no longer revolves around earning love. Space for relationships that do not require you to disappear. Grief is not the opposite of healing. It is proof that healing has begun. Shame blocks progress. Shame blocks progress because shame does not motivate healing. It paralyzes it. Shame doesn't say, you did something wrong. Shame says, there is something wrong with you. And when a person believes they are fundamentally flawed, they don't move toward growth with curiosity. They move with fear. They hide. They perform. They numb. They collapse, or they become rigid and controlling because shame makes the nervous system go into protection. So here's what often happens. Someone recognizes a pattern: people-pleasing, emotional shutdown, overthinking, procrastination, jealousy, addiction, perfectionism, staying in toxic relationships, and their first response is, what is wrong with me? That question seems innocent, but it's loaded with judgment. And the moment you approach yourself with judgment, your system tightens. You don't feel safe inside your own experience. So you either fight yourself or you run from yourself. This is why shame is not just an emotion. It becomes an internal environment, a climate. And in that climate, healing feels impossible because healing requires honesty and shame punishes honesty. If you grew up in an environment where mistakes were met with criticism, ridicule, or withdrawal of love, your system learned being seen as dangerous. So you learn to manage perception. You learn to be good. You learn to be useful. You learn to not need too much. You learn to not feel too loudly. And then later in life, when those same survival strategies show up, you shame yourself for them. But that's like criticizing a cast for being on your arm after a break. The cast isn't the problem. It's the evidence there was once a wound and it was trying to keep you functioning. Your coping strategies were not random. They were not moral failures. They were adaptations to a nervous system that had to survive something it couldn't control. Perfectionism is often an attempt to avoid humiliation. People-pleasing is often an attempt to avoid abandonment. Numbing is often an attempt to avoid overwhelm. Control is often an attempt to avoid chaos. Hyper-independence is often an attempt to avoid disappointment. Overthinking is often an attempt to prevent pain by predicting it. When you understand this, something crucial shifts. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what happened to me and what did I have to do to cope? That one shift from moral judgment to compassionate inquiry opens the door to healing because self-blame keeps you trapped in the same cycle. You feel pain, you cope in the only way you know. You feel shame about coping. If shame intensifies pain, you cope again. It's a closed loop. Shame is fuel for the very behaviors you want to change. People don't binge because they feel good. They binge because they feel bad. People don't shut down because they don't care. They shut down because their system is overwhelmed. People don't cling because they're needy. They cling because their attachment system is panicking. And shame takes these protective responses and turns them into identity. I'm weak. I'm broken. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I'm unlovable. I always ruin things. Now the nervous system is not just carrying the original pain, it's carrying the added burden of self-rejection. And self-rejection is incredibly destabilizing, because the greatest form of safety any human being can have is internal, the sense that I can be with myself. Shame takes that away. It makes you your own enemy. So when we say, understanding coping strategies as adaptations reduces self-blame, we're talking about something very practical, not just philosophical. It changes how your brain relates to your behavior. Instead of using a whip, you use a flashlight. Instead of stop doing this, you're pathetic, it becomes, this is my nervous system trying to protect me. What is it afraid of? That approach reduces threat inside the body. And when threat decreases, the nervous system becomes more flexible. Flexibility is what healing requires, not intensity, not self-hatred, not forcing. Flexibility, that's why compassion is not softness in the childish sense. It's not indulgence. It's not making excuses. It's actually the most direct route to change because it creates enough safety to be honest. Compassion says, this makes sense. You're not crazy. You adapted. And we can learn a different way now. Notice how different that feels in the body. Shame tightens. Compassion softens. Shame makes you hide. Compassion makes you curious. Shame makes you rigid. Compassion makes you present. And presence is where change happens. Because healing is not achieved through punishment. Punishment reenacts the original wound. If you already grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where you were criticized, dismissed, or emotionally abandoned, then shaming yourself is simply continuing the same pattern. Only now you are the one doing it. That's why shame feels familiar. It matches old wiring, but healing means stepping out of that familiar relationship with yourself. It means learning to say, I'm not bad, I'm hurt. I'm not defective, I'm adapted. I'm not failing, I'm triggered. I'm not unworthy, I'm unregulated. And when you name it that way, the door opens. Because once you remove the moral condemnation, you can finally access the real questions. What am I protecting myself from? What emotion am I afraid to feel? What belief about myself is driving this pattern? What did I learn love costs? What did my nervous system learn was necessary to stay connected? Those questions lead somewhere. Shame doesn't. Shame just repeats itself. So if you want a practical way to work with this, try this internal reframe. Instead of saying, I'm doing it again, say, my protector is here. That protector might be, well, the pleaser, or the controller, or the avoider, or the performer, or the rescuer, the number, or the fighter, the checker, and then ask, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? This is not therapy language for decoration. It's nervous system language for regulation. Because the goal is not to eliminate parts of you. The goal is to reassure them. You're essentially telling your body, we're not in the old danger anymore. You don't have to carry this alone. And slowly, as compassion grows, shame shrinks, not because you fixed yourself, but because you stopped attacking yourself. And that's when progress becomes possible, because healing doesn't begin with discipline. It begins with the end of self-violence. Understanding your coping strategies as adaptations doesn't excuse harm. It doesn't deny responsibility. It simply puts your behavior in the correct context. You did what you had to do to survive, and now you can choose something else, not from shame, but from self-respect. And that is what opens the door to real compassion, not the kind that says, it's fine, keep suffering, but the kind that says, you deserve better, and I will not abandon you on the way there. Healing is not hard because you are broken. It is hard because the patterns you are trying to release once protected you. It is hard because your nervous system confuses familiar with safe. It is hard because grief rises when you finally acknowledge what was missing. It is hard because shame has been whispering for years that you are the problem. But here is the deeper truth. Nothing about your coping strategies proves weakness. They prove intelligence. They prove adaptation. They prove that you survived something that required strength. The difficulty of healing is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that you are undoing years of conditioning. You are teaching your body that safety no longer requires self-abandonment. You are teaching your heart that love does not have to hurt to be real. You are teaching your mind that mistakes do not equal unworthiness. And that kind of rewiring takes patience. Healing is not a dramatic breakthrough. It is a quiet, repeated choice to stay present instead of numb, to set a boundary instead of overextending, to feel grief instead of minimizing it, to meet shame with curiosity, to choose authenticity over performance. There will be days when it feels like you are unraveling, but sometimes unraveling is simply the loosening of armor you no longer need. You are not going backward when you feel deeply. You are not weak when you grieve. You are not dramatic when you set limits. You are not selfish when you protect your peace. You are becoming honest, and honesty, especially with yourself, is the foundation of real healing. So if healing feels hard, let that be reassurance, not discouragement. It means you are no longer running. It means you are no longer pretending. It means you are no longer abandoning yourself to stay comfortable for others. It means you are coming home. And coming home, after years of survival, will always feel unfamiliar at first. Stay with it, because on the other side of survival is not perfection, it is freedom.